You're tuned into No Good Music.
And here are your hosts, Rob and Jeremy.
Oh, thank you. We get an extra long applause, actually, on this one.
Who was that host?
Because Jeremy is back.
I'm back. Woohoo!
Oh, hold on. Jeremy's back and loud.
Am I too loud? Oh, shit.
No, you can talk normally now.
Okay.
Yeah, so Jeremy, I don't know.
I'm working weird hours. That's what I blame it on.
I think the last time talked to Jeremy was when he was unemployed.
Yeah.
We put a call out and someone got Jeremy a job.
Yep.
He's working at a dog factory.
Yeah, Chewy.
Yeah.
I'm sure many of you have heard of it or used it. You know, it's funny. All I see now is Chewy advertisements. Everything that I use, any kind of apps, any kind of like TV shows, Chewy.
So they are an unpaid sponsor.
Yeah.
Today on today's show.
There you go.
And so today we're going to talk about better late they say than never, and it's the Peter Frampton book.
Yes.
Do you feel like I do?
No, I don't, but that's okay.
And interestingly enough, is the song is "Do You Feel Like We Do?" Yeah, I do. So, and it says with Alan Light. Now, I haven't done any. I should have done some research on Alan Light. Like, how does Alan Light come into? Is he like helping him remember stuff? Who's Alan Light? You know.
Yeah.
But like books in the past, and if you haven't listened to our other book reviews, we had Brian Johnson. That's a really good one.
Really enjoyed that one.
And Dave Grohl. And yeah, Brian Johnson book we love. And we also went chapter to chapter. So this isn't going to be a real quick one. We're going to try not to make it too long. And so I'm going to start with the book came out October 20th, 2020. Now, this number means something to me, and it's 341 pages. Mm-hmm. And that was the address where I grew up. It was 341. And that number comes up all the time. I'll wake up in the middle of the night, and I'll look at the clock, and it's 341. I was thinking my dad or my mom. So when I saw that. But the thing is, on Amazon, it doesn't say, it says 350 something. So I think they're counting the photos in there.
Okay.
Which aren't really counted.
Right.
I always get excited when I get to the middle and I'm like, oh, are these pages counted? Because I read this book in a week. Jeremy read this, I don't know how many months ago.
A while ago, but it only took me like 3 days.
Yeah. And the thing was, Matt and I just did an interview with Lori Kay, and we had to read her book, and this one was planned before that. So it wasn't planned for me to read 2 books in 2 weeks, but I read 50 pages a day, which isn't bad,
No.
Yeah, so we got 16 chapters. Now, the book starts out in 1980 when Peter was touring in South America.
Yep.
And he was taking off in...
Starts off with a bang.
Yeah. It's Venezuela, and the plane, it was a cargo plane. It was carrying the band's equipment. Mm-hmm. And it crashes, and sadly, 6 people actually die. Peter was not on the plane. Nobody from his band was on the plane, just the instruments, equipment. Now, I wanted to ask Jeremy, because Jeremy listened to the audiobook, is this story interspersed? Because it's interspersed in this book.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the intro really hooks you in because they start off with this and it's like, wow, this is awesome. Mm-hmm. What am I going to get into? And then the book really slowed down from here. But
yeah. But I was just interested because, like I said, in the book, it starts with that, and then it goes into Peter's early childhood, and then
it does come back to it again.
But not every chapter is interspersed with this story, so it's kind of strange until you get to the end, because there is a story to this, and what I've done is we're gonna talk about it with the chapters that it actually, mentioned. Now the book does jump around. Oh my goodness. Also, what I noticed was there's no chapter listing in the front.
Nope.
There's no chapter titles.
Nope.
So I gave the chapters titles.
Okay.
Just to make it amusing.
I know we talked about it on the phone, but something that really frustrated me with this book was the timeline was difficult to follow along with at times because of how it jumped around so much.
Yeah, and I don't like when they start a chapter and they don't... I want to know the year. I want to know where we are.
Agreed.
I mean, some things you could figure out.
Because he would tell stories, and then later in the book, he would go back to some of those stories, but they were at a different point in the story.
Yeah.
Which is, I think, why I struggled with the timeline at times.
Mm-hmm. It was probably harder to listen than to read. I don't know. Because I could actually... read it again. When you're listening, it's hard to rewind, not rewind, but go back.
Go back, yeah.
So let's say that. So like we did in the past, we're gonna go chapter to chapter, and we have a reoccurring theme here, which is the budgie. Which I don't know if Jeremy, if you remember the budgie in Brian Johnson's book, he talked about a budgie.
Mm-hmm.
So this is Budgies and Buddy. That's what I named this. And I'm going to do kind of a synopsis. I do have some quotes I pulled from the book. Just going to basically tell you what the chapter's about. So we find out that Peter's dad was in World War II.
Yep.
And then he became an art teacher. Now there's mentions of Budgies, like I said. And they seem to be pretty popular in England, I guess.
Yeah.
And I still don't know what they are. I'm thinking they're a parakeet, like bird. I don't know. They were pets,
Right.
But Peter would go over to his grandparents' house, and for some reason they let the birds out during dinner of all times, because I had a parakeet, and the thing would crap all over. My mom didn't want the parakeet out. And I'd open the door, and I'd watch the parakeet sit on the door, and then eventually it would fly around, and it would like crap on her curtains, and
Right.
She didn't like that, but I just did that kind of to taunt my mom. And this would land on Peter's head. Now, Peter's brother was born when he was 5, and also we find out Peter got his first guitar on Christmas.
He was 8, right?
Yeah, I think so. He joins the Cub Scouts, and he sees all these kids have badges and, up and down their arms. He asks how he can get a badge, and one category is music. And since Peter has a guitar, he can play a little. He gets up in front of everyone and performs Peggy Sue by Buddy Holly.
Yep.
And
of course, before that, he asked what the easiest one was, and I think his buddy says, like, survival or something. And the Scoutmaster is like, go out and...
Oh, yeah.
Start a fire. And he's like, I can't do this.
Yeah.
What else can I do?
Yeah, I was in the Cub Scouts, and I should go through. I actually have, I'm pretty sure I have my badges. I have a bag that my mom gave me of all my patches, but I haven't looked at them, pins. And I'm pretty sure I can make a fire, without a lighter.
Right.
Because there's this new TV show, not to go off topic here, but I am, Extraction, not Extinction. That's different. Where they put these, like 8 people into the wilderness. Mm-hmm. And some of them, I don't even think they've gone camping before. And they have to build their own shelter. And then the 2 people from their family are on the other side of the camera. They're like they actually stay at this facility. They can watch them. Mm-hmm. They've got cameras in the forest. And it's actually But anyway, you know, you got people that can't build or can't start fires. So Cub Scouts is a good start.
Right.
And so I guess Peter got his badge. He does go into, now this is where he goes into, you know, he jumps around. Because years later he's asked to perform at the Buddy Holly Educational Foundation. And he's asked what song he'd like to play. Because each of them gets to play one song. And he says Peggy Sue. And, well, Paul McCartney was given that song. So Peter has to pick another one. But after a little while, they can't get a hold of Paul. And Peter actually gets to play the song.
And he got to use a special guitar that was associated to the song, too.
I think, yeah, I think they were given, each given, I don't know how many performers there were. But Jeremy, do you know who owns the Buddy Holly songs?
Disney. I don't know.
There's one person.
Michael Jackson.
Paul. Michael, he's not around there. Paul McCartney.
Okay.
He owns Buddy Holly songs. Chapter 2, I'm going to call that That's Bill Wyman. Peter starts his first band, and he talks about Buddy Holly again and a group called the Shadows. And I think he mentions them a couple times. He starts to take guitar lessons, and he's around 12 or 13. And I love this because it's actually encouraged by his father and suggested that Peter take, like, if he's going to be serious about music, to go take guitar lessons.
Yeah, because he starts out in woodshop, of all things.
Yeah.
He talks about woodshop. Like, music was an option, but he chose woodshop because he wanted to do something different or whatever. I don't know. He kind of briefly touched on it.
Well,
but then he kind of wakes up and he's like, I love music. Why am I not taking music?
Yeah.
And so he switches.
I mean, maybe he would have gone on to make guitars.
Yeah.
Who knows?
Yeah.
Maybe he would have worked at Martin Guitar. And now he's, let's see here. By age 14, he's in a band called the True Beats. And they're now playing every Shadows song they could, along with some other songs. So is this the first tribute band? You know, they were playing other songs, but you know, if they're playing a lot of the Shadows songs.
Right.
He talks about when the Beatles exploded on the scene, just a great time for creativity and how all these great bands were springing up all over. And he's dating a girl, and her father has something to do with film. He goes over to her house one day. I found this hilarious. And who was sitting in the living room but Richard Chamberlain? I'm not real familiar with Richard Chamberlain, but there was a huge show, very popular show in England called Dr. Kildare. And what does he say to Richard when they're introduced? Hi, so nice to meet you. My mother says you're a terrible actor. And he actually invites Richard to his show, and Richard actually shows up with his date or his girl and her dad show up to. And now there's something I never knew, and we find out in this chapter, is that Peter knew David Bowie.
Right.
I don't think I've ever seen Peter Frampton and David Bowie, like video of them playing together, or I just never noticed, you know. But when he was 14, and David, I figured, was maybe 3 years older than him. And David was in a band called the Conrads with a K. And he was also in Peter's, his dad's art class, and they got to be friends. David was working a music shop, and Peter took over his job when David left. And Peter also filled in with the Conrads after David left the band. Yeah. And then Peter got fired from his job at the music shop for stealing guitar strings. Now, while at the music shop, he meets Tony Chapman, who was in the band called The Herd. And through Tony, Peter meets and becomes friends with Bill Wyman of the Rolling Stones. So him and Bill would sometimes hang out. They play guitar together and go out to clubs. And Peter meets Jimi Hendrix at one of the clubs. He says Mick was sometimes there, and even John Lennon. And And even though this didn't help Peter gain popularity, sometimes it's helpful in who you know or become friends with. But sometimes it's not a good thing, because Peter stays over at Bill's apartment one night and he sleeps with some random girl Bill set him up with. And the next day, Peter's sitting at the table, I think in the kitchen, and he feels something crawling on him. And he asks his mom to take a look, and all she goes is, "That's Bill Wyman." It drags Peter off to the chemist. The chemist, yes, that's what it said, the chemist. And what you gather early on in the book is Peter's parents truly believed that even at 14, he would go on to do something big.
Yep. So
it'd be incredible if, he had did record stuff back then, this band he was in, and hear how, I don't know how good could he be at 14, but,
Right.
And what's amazing here is that he actually quit school and he went on the road with the herd. And his mom's okay with it, but has to convince his dad. And there's one stipulation from his dad, and that Peter has to get paid £15 a week.
Yep.
And then his dad meets with the manager of the band and says, take it or leave it. And Peter must have been really good, because the manager agrees.
Yeah. Like no hesitation, it sounded like.
And the entire band is barely making that a week. That's what's amazing. But then when the band starts making more money, each member is getting like £30 a week. They still keep Peter at 15.
Right. And he goes, so it all evened out in the end.
Yeah. So now we're on the chapter 3. I Don't Want to Die Dangling. That's the name. And again, these are
fake names.
Yeah. If you hear some extra noise, it's very windy.
In the studio?
Yeah, in the studio. We're in a wind tunnel. Now he goes on tour with the herd, and pretty soon they're opening for the Who. Now back then, the Who would play high schools, and we're not talking about the Who, when the Who became huge,
Right.
This is all in the beginning of these bands too. But Peter travels with John Entwistle, who's the bass player, and Keith Moon.
Keith Moon, yep.
Yeah, the drummer.
Who he had very high praise for when he was not out of it, I believe were his words.
Yeah, because Keith Moon got kind of crazy. I mean, he supposedly, the character in the Muppets, Animal, is supposedly based on Keith Moon.
Right.
So the herd is becoming more and more popular. Now Peter is singing a couple of the songs, but he doesn't want to be out in front as a lead singer. But his mom thinks he's cute and that they want him in front of the band. Now John and Keith, they kind of like to torture Peter. At one point, they're on the 4th floor of one of the venues, and Keith encourages Peter to stick his head out the window. And as he does, they both rush over and hang Peter out of the window by his feet.
Yeah.
Now the band gets into the top 10 with the song I Don't Want Our Loving to Die, which is hard to say. I don't want our loving to die. They record another song, and the song tanks, and Peter wants out of his contract.
Yeah.
Okay, now we're on to chapter 4. Small Faces and Gilded Splinters. So Steve Marriott, leaves Small Faces and wants to join the new band Peter is forming. Meanwhile, Peter is asked to join Small Faces.
Yeah, that was funny.
And Small Faces end up getting Rod Stewart and Ronnie Wood to replace Steve. So with Steve, Peter forms Humble Pie.
Yep.
And
so, sorry not to interrupt you, but I was really hoping to find out more about Humble Pie, because I didn't really know their background. I knew that he was in the band. But I mean, there was some stuff which was definitely intriguing, but it felt like it was kind of skipped over in a sense. He only talked about the major accomplishments of the band and some of the issues, which we're going to talk about, but I don't know. I wanted more.
Well, I have here, it would have been cool. I feel the same way. I actually have here, would have been cool to go into how they got the name.
Yep.
I'm always interested in band names, and I know sometimes it's just writing down some names and then picking one. But yeah, I felt there should have been more of, how they formed the band. Actually, the whole book, he didn't go into great detail about much of anything.
Yep.
Now, years later, Peter runs into Dr. John. He tells Peter that he has to thank him because he had some problems back in the day, and he was in jail on a drug charge. He couldn't afford a lawyer, but then Humble Pie did a cover of one of his songs, and he could then pay the lawyer and get out of jail. Now, the song was off Humble Pie's album Rockin' the Fillmore, and it was I Walk on Gilded Splinters. And I listened to this. It's an amazing 23 minutes long. I don't know if you've heard the song.
No.
Now, the Allman Brothers, Widespread Panic, even Sonny and Cher has covered this song. And I went through this, and Widespread Panic's version is 12 minutes. The Allman Brothers is 8 minutes. And Sonny and Cher's version is just a little over 2 minutes. They didn't have that much energy, I guess.
Yeah.
They weren't a jam. Sonny and Cher weren't a jam band.
Right.
Now, Humble Pie embark on their first tour of America, opening for Mountain. Now, I know Mountain because the lead singer, Leslie West, was always on Howard Stern. That's
okay.
how maybe I would have discovered them if I didn't hear him. And if you know the song Mississippi Queen, that's Mountain.
No, I know Mountain.
Yeah, okay.
They were lumped in with like that southern rock genre.
Yeah, Molly Hatchet.
Yep.
Matt tried to quiz me a couple weeks ago on Molly Hatchet. He didn't think I knew. And I'm like, Z95 played them all the time. I thought they were from here. I'm serious. I thought they were from like Phillipsburg.
Wow.
Well, you know what? They weren't in. I didn't see them in magazines like that I bought. Molly Hatchet. I didn't hear about them. Johnny Carson didn't mention or whatever.
Yeah.
But you know what I'm saying? They weren't popular. They weren't like Kiss, or they weren't like the bigger.
They weren't flirting with disaster enough.
Yeah. So Humble Pie end up running out of money, and they go back to London. That's when they signed to A&M Records for $400,000 for 4 albums. So each member was entitled to $25,000 a year or album.
And I think it was right around this time, Peter actually came up with a great idea because they wanted one bank account where all the money would drop into, and they could, share it.
Yeah.
But Peter's like, no, I think we should have 4, which ended up being a very smart idea.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, we'll find out.
Yeah.
Peter gets his first Les Paul, and it's a 1954 Gibson. And we're going to find out that's going to link into the first story. So chapter 5, All Mobbed Up. See, I think Peter should have named these.
Yeah.
So we find out a little more about Humble Pie. They're mostly a support act, and let's say they were hardly getting any extra money besides the yearly, $25,000. That's what's they're touring, but they're really not getting any more money. And this is the chapter we first hear the name D. Anthony. Now, he was Humble Pie's manager, and he was also involved in the mob.
Yep.
And supposedly he wanted to have Frank Barcelona killed because he wouldn't sign a band that the mob wanted signed. Frank was an American talent agent, and he worked with Humble Pie on their tour. He started the first ever major rock and roll booking agency in the U.S. That's not in the book. See, this is what I'm telling. I had to look up this guy.
Right.
Why couldn't we put that little, I like the little trivia stuff,
Yeah.
And also at one point, Steve Marriott wanted to leave the band, and Dee had his friend, supposedly, this is like so, like, I don't know, this seems made up. Mm-hmm. John Gotti talk to Steve and make him think differently. Mm-hmm. John Gotti, come on. Yeah. Is this true? And Steve Marriott's not around to, tell us. Now, Rockin' the Fillmore went gold. The song I Don't Need No Doctor is amazing because it was written during a sound check. They were opening for Grand Funk Railroad, and they were just jamming and came up with the song.
Right. And
the song is 9 minutes long. And then Peter tells Dee that he's leaving the band. And Peter doesn't, John Gotti doesn't visit him,
no,
I guess.
No.
So chapter 6.
And that's when they decide to go to one bank account after he leaves the band.
Yeah.
and he did, touch on, then they had issues.
Mm-hmm.
But
I think there's a tornado outside.
I know. The other thing, I think it was around, I don't know the exact chapter, so I apologize, but Peter was very aware of his look,
mm-hmm.
and he was so afraid of being lumped into a boy band.
Oh, yeah.
He brought that up a couple of times, which I
it's in another
found
chapter.
interesting.
Yeah.
Oh, was it? Okay, I apologize.
No, that's okay. And so now we're in the chapter 6, Talk Box. Now Peter records with George Harrison on a Doris Troy, I had to look her up, album for the song Ain't That Cute.
Mm-hmm.
Now I listened to the song.
So did I, actually.
And it has a memorable line, Jeremy, in the song.
Yeah.
Do you remember?
I don't remember what it is.
It's no Disney song.
No.
Stoning each other, boning each other.
That's what it was.
Yeah. That's nice. Peter ends up hanging out at George's concert for Bangladesh, which I do have on vinyl. I was listening to some of that. Now, he did rehearsals, and he wasn't aware at the time that he was a backup plan for Eric Clapton, who I think may have skipped the rehearsals. They said he was strung out. He ended up playing. But Peter did go on to play on George's All Things Must Pass album. Now, he is not credited. And it did say his guitar parts were overdubbed.
Right.
So he wasn't, I guess, there when they were recording, but after. But even engineers, people who mix albums get they're credited.
Yeah, they're usually acknowledged in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah.
What's also interesting, we've covered a lot here. Mm-hmm. I think he's still not even 20 years old yet, right? Or is he just in his young 20s?
I don't know what year we're at.
And this is where the timeline became tough to follow because he's already name dropped so many big names.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And I'm like, he's got to be in his 30s by now. And he's not.
So Humble Pie, let's see, 14. I don't know if he didn't record. He recorded, I think, he might have recorded the 4 albums or maybe 3 of the albums. Because I know the one album that I have, he's not on, and it's probably the 4th album, 5th album.
Okay.
I might have that in here, but I don't know if they were every year. We're gonna say he's like 17 or 18. I don't know.
I think he's in his late. I don't think he's even 20 yet.
Okay.
Because he also steals someone's wife.
Yeah. So let's see. And I was gonna say John Lennon and Yoko Ono now, right?
Mm-hmm.
They are credited on George's album,
right?
For, get this, hand claps. And Peter wasn't credited for playing guitar.
Right.
Now, that was the last time he saw George. He does regret not talking to him after.
Yep.
And George passed in, believe it or not, 2001. 24 years ago.
Right.
Now, in this chapter, Peter discovers a talk box. And if you know Peter Frampton, you may know him for that unique, sound that he created.
One of the most iconic things about Peter Frampton, I think.
Now, Peter did not create the talk box.
No.
But I do have some history here. In 1939, Alvino Ray, an amateur radio operator, used a carbon throat microphone wired in such a way as to modulate his electric steel guitar sound. Now, the mic, originally developed for military pilot communications, was placed on the throat of Ray's wife, Louise King, one of the King sisters, I don't know, who stood behind a curtain and mouthed the words, along with the guitar lines. And it was called, this was called singing guitar. And it was also in the movie Jam Session as a novelty attraction and wasn't developed any further. And I think Jam Session was probably in the 30s or 40s. Now, Peter first discovered the talk box through a guy by the name of Pete Drake. Hate the Drake, you know. No, I just watched that Seinfeld.
I just saw it not too long ago, too.
You know, Peter's still trying to get his TV set back.
The Drakeette took it.
Yeah. So it's all the charity. And Drake's device consisted of an 8-inch paper cone speaker driver attached to a funnel from which a clear tube brought the sound to the performer's mouth. And it was only loud enough to be useful in the recording studio. That was the thing. So Drake wanted it louder. The Drake then found a guy by the name of Bob Heel, and Bob perfected it. It was then first heard on Joe Walsh's song, Rocky Mountain Way.
Right.
This preceded, this was 3 years before Do You Feel Like We Do? And a couple other stuff in this chapter is Peter getting to play a guitar belonging to John Lennon for Harry Nilsson's movie Son of Dracula, which also starred Ringo Starr and Keith Moon. They were also in the movie, so... Now we're on to chapter 7, Poke and Penny. Peter records his first... Oh, and the other thing is this book, Peter, I was surprised, but he talks about almost every album he recorded.
Yeah.
But the thing was, if he kind of talked about maybe some of the bigger albums, or even like the last couple ones in more detail. That would have been...
Better?
Yeah. This was just like a grocery list.
Yes.
Of stuff.
Yes.
That's what it seemed like. This happened. I bought a house. Like, that's the other thing. We know every time he moved. I'm not trying to put the book down, but I don't know. We are critiquing it. So.
We'll review it at the end.
And we can't like everything.
No.
And Jeremy's favorite artist of all time is Peter Frampton. So,
I think that's why I was so... I don't want to say disappointed with the book, because that's not a fair critique.
Yeah.
But I was looking forward to this book to learn about Peter Frampton.
Oh, yeah.
And I don't feel like I learned a lot about him other than all the names that he dropped that he's kind of worked with.
Yeah. I mean, it was like going on Wikipedia.
Yeah. Yeah.
We wanted a little more Peter.
But a grocery list, that was in my mind, too.
Okay.
It almost felt like it just a list of did this, did this, did this, did this, did this. Like, great. Expand. Tell us more.
Mm-hmm. So he records his first solo album, Wind of Change. Mm-hmm. I have that on vinyl. And so Andrew Bone from The Herd convinces Peter to record a Stones song, and he records Jumpin' Jack Flash. Now here we have, and I bring it up because we have another instance of a songwriter thanking someone for doing a cover of their song because it made them a lot of money.
Yep.
And that is Keith Richards, who thanks Peter, just like Dr. John did, for helping him buy his first home.
Yeah.
And then I'm also amazed in this book, like, it sounds like Peter was making, I don't know, it sounded like he was making some money. That's what amazes me. When, you think of people that are really legendary, famous, and you think of them as having a lot of money. Mm-hmm. But that's one thing in this book that Peter did tell us, is that he was broke, mm-hmm. So he did he opened up a little bit about that.
Right.
I think he was I don't know. It was either he didn't remember stuff, or he was too afraid to go into. You know, he was doing drugs and drinking, and there's got to be some wild stories.
Yep.
You would think.
Yep.
I don't know.
We didn't get many, that's for sure.
So Peter meets his new girlfriend, Penny, but she happens to be married to an acquaintance of Peter. The dude's in Japan, but that doesn't stop Peter from eventually writing the songs Baby, I Love Your Way, Show Me the Way, and I'm In You.
Yep.
That's kind of personal. I have that album too. I think I got it because I found it at the record store. I'm like, I don't think I ever heard of that album. But the title, like, what the I'm In You. That's, I don't know.
Yeah.
And Peter also records his second album, Camel. He's touring. He even opens for Humble Pie at some point.
Yep.
So he's building an audience, and he goes over how he's, you know, you're either the second or third bill, but you want to impress people so much that you want to be the second or even the first. You know,
I was gonna say he wanted to be in the middle. It sounded like.
Yeah. Now his self-titled album comes out, and this is his fourth album, and it has Show Me the Way on it. And there's a medley on there, Nassau with Baby I Love Your Way. Mm-hmm. And this album sells 300,000 copies. Now he's now a headliner after the album is released, so he can do shows on his own. And it always reminds me of Cheap Trick, the way they put out. I think their live album was, I think, their fourth album. Okay. Peter's live album was his fifth album.
Yep.
But you have these songs that we know very well, but they're only from the live. Like even Kiss, Rock and Roll All Night, you're not going to hear the original, you're going to hear the live version. Right. The Cheap Trick, Surrender, I Want You to Want Me, those are the live versions. There are they recorded them before, you know, the live, but nobody knew who they were. Not many people. And it's funny because Cheap Trick opened for Kiss, and, you know, it all comes together. So Chapter 8, Becoming a Sex Symbol. And this might be what Jeremy was talking about earlier. Now this covers Frampton Comes Alive, Peter's breakthrough album. And let's see. Now he goes into all the great bands he's learned from. And he kind of lets us in on how insecure he was as a guitar player, performer. Yeah. Now, the live album was originally recorded at Winterland in San Francisco. They used a mobile unit to record the concert. Now, it was originally supposed to be a single album, but when they played it for Jerry Moss at A&M, he said, "Where's the rest? Where's Show Me the Way? Where's Baby, I Love Your Way? Where's all the songs that have way in them?" No, I just put that in there. So, but apparently Peter didn't like how they came out and scrapped them, and didn't he wasn't even thinking of putting those. Why wouldn't you put your hits on there? Right. So they do another 6 shows, and they get the songs they need. Now the album came out January 15th, 1976, and by April 10th it was #1 in the U.S.
Yep. Huge.
And I found this funny. First thing Peter did was change his phone number. And things started to change, and kind of drastically, you know, as you become famous and really famous, because everyone knew who he was. Mm-hmm. When he was on tour with Leonard Skinner, he came down the elevator at the hotel. The doors open. There's a sea of people. And Dee rushes over, and I think another guy, and says, "What are you doing out of your room?" You know? Yeah. And there's something Peter says in the book that I do find hard to believe, but this was back in 1976, but he says that he gets a call telling him his album was the biggest selling album of all time. Right. But I figured this out. It did sell 8 million copies, right? Yep. Now, Sgt. Pepper sold 2.5 million at that time. But as of today, Sgt. Pepper is at 32 million. So these albums that we just know Sgt. Pepper, right? You think, how's Peter Frampton's album bigger than that? Well, it's really not now.
Right.
You know.
Right. But at that time it was.
Yeah.
And it was so unique because it was a live album.
Yeah.
Which was unheard of.
Mm-hmm. And Frampton Comes Alive is now at 11 million sold. So it still didn't surpass the Beatles.
And something that was also interesting they talked about was the cover of the album. I don't know if you were going to talk about that or not. But they had to kind of change it. Like, it wasn't supposed to be what it was because it was missing lighting. He didn't like his shirt. And he had to get talked into that actually being the cover of the album. He didn't want it to be the cover.
Well, they added another light.
Yes.
Because there's like a little light on the left. I think they added the one on the right.
Yep.
But then he turns to drugs and alcohol, and it's probably because of all the stress and the fame.
Yep.
And
he was being pressured to get another album out real quick.
Oh yeah. But someone later asked Cameron Crowe what happened to Peter Frampton, and he said, "I love this. It was like Peter was strapped to the nose cone of a rocket.
Yep.
They shot him out into space. He landed on the moon. He got off, and there was nobody else there."
Yep.
You know. And this was after, I guess, the success of that album. Like, what happened? You know. But Peter wants to get away from the sex symbol thing, but ends up shirtless. This is what we're talking about on the cover of Rolling Stone.
Yeah.
He's tricked into it. The photographer, I guess Peter thinks he's pretty much done, but the last photo, he wants him to take his shirt off. Well, guess what? That's what they used for the cover.
Yeah. And
he wasn't very happy about that.
Nope.
And Peter starts doing coke, and not the soda either. And he said he would basically come off stage, do some lines, and go back for the encore.
Yeah.
So
that was wild.
Yeah. And he said he never wanted to mix alcohol or drugs with his performance.
Yeah, he made that mistake, one time, I think he said, where he was so out of it, he couldn't even perform, and he promised that would never happen again.
Yeah. So chapter 9, and this is a weird one because I actually brought this up to Matt before I read this chapter, and I'm not lying, and it was about Milton Berle. And how big Milton Berle is.
Okay.
And the chapter I call it, is Milton Berle, oh my God, is Milton Berle that big, in show business? So Peter's he's feeling pressure, like we said, to make another hit album.
Yep.
But Comes Alive was 6 years of material. That's what you have, 6 years of material to put that album together. It's like almost like a greatest hits,
Yeah. And he wanted to take some time, which I found fascinating because usually artists want to build off of that success and get something out.
Yeah.
But he didn't care if he waited a few years, it almost sounded like, to collect his thoughts and put some good music together.
I think it was, here's another case of someone who just wants to perform, write music, and wants to make a living to live, but doesn't want to, doesn't care about being hugely successful.
Right.
And then, excuse me, Peter talks about running in the Milton Berle. Now, here's the point in our show where we warn people. Our shows are explicit anyway, but I'm going to talk about Milton Berle. And I said a couple weeks ago, I said I was talking about Milton Berle. And supposedly, Jeremy, he had one of the biggest penises in Hollywood.
Okay, great.
Now, I remember Gilbert Gottfried. I always listen to his podcast. Rest in peace, Gilbert. He always asked his guests, because he had older people on there, like Dick Cavett and older actors, if they knew Milton Berle, they were asked about if they ever saw his penis.
Okay.
Yeah. And even Howard Stern grilled. Milton Berle was on Howard Stern, by the way. And he even grilled Milton Berle about it. And he wouldn't go into it because he was much older too.
Right.
Then. Now, Marilyn Monroe once said I'm not lying. I found this. I don't have video of her saying this, but he had the biggest cock in Hollywood and had her best sex with him. I didn't know she had sex with Milton Berle. So Peter Frampton meets Milton Berle for the first time. Milton Berle goes, "How's your Hampton, Frampton?" Now, this was a charity event for the Share Foundation, SHARE. And apparently Milton thought it was time to share his secret. And Hampton is short for Hampton Wick, which is slang for dick. And Milton, get this, he was so proud of his penis, he would actually whip it out and show people. And then Peter goes on to say that he's met some not so nice famous people. I wanted him to go into this.
Right.
Come on, tell us.
Yeah.
So Back to Frampton Comes Alive. It was the first album to sell 1 million cassettes. And unfortunately, it didn't win any major awards. You know, no leg lamps. But only a...
He thought he was going to.
Yeah.
But he got, what was it, the Eagles surpassed him?
Yeah, he was in competition with the Eagles.
Yeah.
But he won a People's Choice Award for Favorite Male Performer.
Yep.
Now, the album wasn't even... He doesn't even go into this. I had to figure this out. The album wasn't even nominated for a Grammy. You know, Paul Simon's Still Crazy After All These Years won Best Album of the Year that year. Now, this is when we find out that his manager, D, is screwing Peter out of money.
Robbing him blind.
Yeah. And there was one instance, it was Peter sells out JFK Stadium.
Yep.
And something like he tells him that the stadium seats 12,000 people when it seats like 20, something like this, like 22,000.
Right.
And he pockets the 10,000
extra tickets.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He pockets the money from the extra 10,000.
Yeah.
Now, chapter 10, I just call this acting. This is not going to go into this whole thing. So we have the Sgt. Pepper's movie.
He got duped into this, too.
Now, for me, you know, and I know, like, maybe some people, when, you know, you're younger and growing up, and certain things you remember, and they just hold a different memory than maybe, you know, other things. Like Sgt. Pepper movie, right? Mm-hmm. I have this on DVD. I love this movie because I think it might have been the first time I was really introduced to the Beatles songs, even though the Beatles weren't in it.
No, but they were. Peter was told they would be.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. But you got Alice Cooper. You got the Bee Gees. I love the Bee Gees. Yep. I loved Saturday Night Fever.
Yep.
That was the first album I ever bought. So I love this movie. Peter didn't, and the movie did not do well at all. Then he was in TV show Baba Black Sheep, which I've never seen. And then he gets in a car crash in the Bahamas, looking for Penny. And then he goes into the guitar story with this chapter. And Peter's told that the plane carrying the cargo has crashed. And he was... I was worried because he starts talking about his guitar, and I'm like, oh my God, he didn't care about the people, but he wasn't. This was before he was told that 6 people had perished.
Right.
So now Peter's guitar and other guitars are missing. So then we go to chapter 11, and I have this called D Gone. And we start with Peter. He's in the hospital. I think he broke ribs, broke a lot of stuff.
His arm.
He crashed into a wall or something.
Something with his arm, because he barely had enough muscle. He thought he was going to have to lose his arm.
Oh, yeah, yeah. And I don't have this here, but I remember him saying when he was getting on the plane, he was wearing one of those robes, and, you know, his ass was hanging out.
That's right, yeah.
Now he eventually goes back on tour. Now this chapter seems to jump around from when he was in the hospital to being on tour, back again. Yep. He meets a new woman, Barbara Gold.
Yeah, because the woman that he married was cheating on him every show, and I guess it was known, and nobody told him.
Well, when you have a woman who's cheating on her husband, I think she might have been married when Peter met her.
Yeah.
Then, she's going to maybe cheat again. Right. She was actually cheating. Yeah. Peter wasn't cheating. She was. Right. And then she's cheating again.
Yeah.
So her name's Barbara Gold. He eventually has 2 kids with her. Yep. And Peter has it out with Dee, Anthony. Dee cashes a check for $250,000. It was made out to Peter. Yep. So he could fund a Broadway show for Peter Allen. And Peter gets Dee to give him the title to his house, but it really means nothing because Dee is broke.
Yep.
And Peter actually ends up paying Dee to get out of his contract.
To get away from him.
Which is amazing.
Yeah. Even though he had they could have gone to court and he could have proven not all, but a lot of the things he was stealing from him and what he owed to him. And because he had signed the contract, it was more beneficial for Peter to pay Dee to get out than it was to try and sue him because he had nothing.
Yeah, so he couldn't continue taking his money. And Peter figures out that he stole at least $8 million. Yep. And that's today's money, that'd be $31 million.
Yeah.
But Peter gets his publishing rights back, so that's a good thing. Peter signs with Atlantic, and we're now in 1983. He doesn't release the first album until 86.
Which means he's still only in his mid-20s? Late 20s?
I don't know when he was... Peter Frampton just had a birthday. And what he turned? 74? Jeremy's you're gonna look it up?
I was.
Yeah, let's see how... We need to know how old he is.
On my spiffy new phone that I got.
Oh, yeah.
All right.
Jeremy had like a Galaxy 3.
He was born in 1950.
Oh, okay. Well, he's 33.
So he's in his mid-30s.
Yeah.
I apologize.
Yeah, okay. So Peter's actually asked to join the... Oh, I love this story. Because Peter gets a phone call from Pete Townsend. Right? Now, was Pete on drugs? Was Pete drinking?
Right.
But...
Oh, this is a great story. Yeah.
Yeah, he thinks that... Peter kind of indicates he's leaving the Who and wants Peter to replace him. And Peter's going to call... Pete Townsend's going to call him back. And he waits and waits. I think it was 3 weeks. And when he calls Pete back, Pete doesn't remember anything about it. Because he even asked his wife he's like, should I do this? Should I, I mean, this could be once in a lifetime, join the Who.
Right.
So now we're on to chapter 12. Money can buy you a house in the Hollywood Hills. So Peter records with David Bowie.
Yep.
Yes, on Never Let Me Down. And he goes on the Glass Spider tour. And this is not in the book. I had to look this up. This was May 30th, 1987 to November 28th, 87. That was the Glass Spider tour. So at 87. Now, I found it interesting that if someone gave Bowie a bad review... Now, I don't know how these reviews were so, instantaneous, because he indicated David Bowie would be in another vehicle behind the bus if the concert got a bad review.
Right.
But how do you do a concert and all of a sudden the review is out like that? I don't understand that. And then if it was a good review, he'd travel on the tour bus with them.
Right.
Now, this is another interesting thing. The band Will to Power records a medley of the songs Baby, I Love Your Way and Freebird. 2 songs that don't go together.
Right.
I remember this because I listened to it again. I remember hearing this on the radio.
Okay.
Because I remember a woman was singing it. Now, Peter...
But they didn't get permission to do it.
Yeah. So this song it's amazing how much money this song made.
Yeah.
Peter gets a whopping, because this is the thing, the Allman Brothers and Peter, they each got 50% of the profits.
Right.
This song made $1 million.
Yep.
Peter all of a sudden gets $500,000. And what I didn't talk about was before this, Peter had to borrow money from A&M record executive Ahmet Erdogan, and he borrowed $100,000 from him.
Yeah.
So now he can pay him back.
And it sounded like it was no big deal too. Like, because I don't know, he
just needed money to live off of. Like,
sounded devastated.
For food and
he had nothing going on, and he basically had to beg this guy for money, but he just was like, "Sure, here you go."
I have the feeling Peter wasn't good with money.
Well, sounds that way.
Because right after this, he buys a house in the Hollywood Hills. So now we're buying another house. Instead of like putting money away, him and his wife split up. Then he starts working with Steve Marriott. Now this is sad. Things are good until Steve starts drinking all the time. Peter wants him to not drink while they're working together, writing songs. And Steve eventually flies back home from the U.S. to England.
Yep.
Now him and his wife, and I know this story, him and his wife were staying with friends before I guess they decided to go. But it sounded like it was nearby.
Mm-hmm.
But in the middle of the night, Steve, after drinking excessively, leaves and goes back to his house, and he falls asleep with a cigarette in his hand.
Yep.
And basically, there's a house fire, and Steve dies.
Yep.
And he's 44. Now, this was 1991. So Peter's 41.
Yep.
And now we're back to the story of Frampton's guitar. Yeah. Black Beauty, Les Paul. Now, apparently a guard at the airport took home the 4 or 5 guitars that survived the plane crash. He sells Peter's Black Gibson, or Les Paul, to a local musician. And we find out that this musician plays the guitar for 15 years. He uses his guitar.
He's been using this thing for a long time.
So obviously he wasn't famous, and,
Nope.
Chapter 13, clusterfuck. Peter goes into the cluster headaches, which is causing him to fall. He's told that oxygen cures headaches, so now he's carrying oxygen around with him wherever he goes.
Yep.
And this is, I love these chance encounters. He runs into a woman in a shop at the hotel. Like, I remember in the Dave Grohl book, Dave Grohl lost his wallet. And then years later, I don't know if it was years later, Dave goes into a gas station or something.
Uh-huh.
And the girl there said, are you Dave Grohl? Maybe she knew he was Dave Grohl. And says, my dad or my parents found your wallet like years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And they still had the wallet.
Right.
Like, if he didn't go into that gas station, he would have,
Yeah.
So anyway, he runs into this woman and approaches him and says, do you remember Tina? So Tina was a girl Peter met in 1979 in Cincinnati when he flew around while on tour. He flew her around, and she had to go home because a friend was in a car accident. And they lost touch since then. So this girl he meets in the hotel is Tina's friend. And Tina goes to... she's supposed to go to a concert. I wanted to say it was Bryan Adams, but I'm not positive now. And we don't know what year this is either.
Right.
This could be the 80s. I don't know. But Tina decides to go to Peter's concert that night. And then they become a couple. And he buys a house in Bel Air. New girlfriend, new house. New girlfriend, new house.
He even says his address in this book at one point.
Oh, does it?
Yeah.
Well, he doesn't live there anymore, probably. I don't know. And then he ends up in Nashville. He has a child with Tina. Her name's Mia. And he goes into various movies and TV shows his songs were in. And he also appears in Wayne's World, but he's cut from the scene.
Yep.
It says. He records with Ringo. While in the studio, he's told the mic he's using was John Lennon's, used to, he says he sang Imagine into the mic. I don't know if he recorded Imagine, but so that's pretty much that chapter. And chapter 14, Close But No Cigar. Almost Famous is being filmed by Peter's friend Cameron Crowe. I love Almost Famous. The other movie I love is Singles. Have you ever seen Singles?
No. I've seen Almost Famous.
Singles is about Seattle and the grunge. See, Pearl Jam, Eddie Vedder's, like most of Pearl Jam's in the movie.
Okay.
I'm going to let you borrow it.
Okay.
What?
I still have your Chuck Norris
Oh, that's okay. That's
DVD,
okay.
I think.
You have to see Singles.
Okay.
And Peter, well, the thing I loved about Singles was that Bridget Fonda's in it, and I had this thing for Bridget Fonda.
Okay.
I've seen every Bridget Fonda movie, you know. So anyway, Peter writes a lot of the music for Almost Famous. The fictional band Stillwater. Have you seen Almost Famous?
Yes.
Okay, good. He even teaches Billy Crudup, if that's how you say it, how to play the guitar. So he looks the part. And the live shots are even called by Peter, meaning that he's making sure that his hands are on the right frets, that, you know, they're corresponding to the chords that you're seeing him play.
Yep.
And then Peter moves again. You know, movie, album, move, girlfriend, move. No, I don't know. He moves to Cincinnati. Oh.
Yep.
And we figure this is 2000. We're up to 2000 now.
Yeah.
He builds a nice home studio in his house. And he's clean for 2 years, but rebounds. And then he joins AA. I don't have this in here, but there was an interesting story about something about him and this other guy. I think they tried to go to the meeting, but I'm thinking it was the wrong night or something, and they had their own little meeting. It'd be cool if this guy, like, he doesn't know who he is,
right,
or was.
Right.
And they had their own AA meeting at some coffee shop maybe or something like that. Yep. I don't know. Now he talks about a couple albums he recorded during this time, like the album Now, 2003, and Fingerprints, all instrumental.
Now was my first Peter Frampton CD that I owned. I got it for Christmas that year. I would have been, that was 2000, you said?
2003.
2003, so I was 16.
Yeah. And then Fingerprints came out in 2006. And there's a great version, check it out, A Black Hole Sun on that album. And Peter uses the talk box on this song for the chorus.
Yeah.
And it's mostly instrumental except for that part. Now Mike Cameron is drumming on the song. He was the drummer for Soundgarden.
Yep.
And Pearl Jam since the Yield tour in 1998. So he's with Pearl Jam.
Yep.
And when Soundgarden reunited, he was a member of both Pearl Jam and Soundgarden at the same time. Peter's father passes away, and he does talk to David Bowie, who talks to his mom and him on the phone. Yeah. Now, Peter, ironically, ends up winning his first and only Grammy for Fingerprints.
Yep.
And it's sad, but he says, a Grammy shouldn't mean that much, really, should it? One should be confident about knowing how good you are at whatever you do, but the aftermath of Comes Alive stripped me of my confidence as a player. That's very sad.
Mm-hmm.
And Peter talks about Peter Frampton's Guitar Circus tour. Now, I saw this tour, and it was B.B. King and Peter Frampton, and
I thought of you right away because I know how much of a B.B. King fan you are.
And some other guy, I forget. I should have looked it up.
Okay.
He opened. Now these were with Peter and a couple other guest guitarists, and we had Roger McGuinn, B.B. King, of course, Dean DeLeo from Stone Temple Pilots, Rick Nielsen even.
Yep.
Now, this was 2013.
He's also talking about his IBM at this time. Is that what it was called? The disease that he has.
Oh, yeah, we'll get into that.
Yeah.
That follows the cluster headaches.
Yeah.
And then, so this Peter Frampton's Guitar Circus. I don't know if it was a review of the show I was at. It was at Still Stacks in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. But I was a little disappointed because in the show, Peter brings out the other person. I think after they play, like, he'll have, like, he had an opener and then B.B. King.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think before, like, probably during B.B. King's set, Peter comes out and he sits down next to B.B. And you think this is going to be incredible. I've talked about this before. And B.B. doesn't seem to want to play. He says, oh, you do something or something like that. And Peter, I don't know what song they did, or I don't know if B.B. sang, but they're sitting and B.B.'s not even, I don't even think he played. Because I'm like, here's two guitar greats.
Right.
So, and whatever review I read said about the same thing, you know.
Yep. And
it's sad because I think that might have been the last show I saw B.B. King. I saw B.B. 8 times. So, now we go back to the guitar story, and it gets a little bit more interesting here. And maybe our listeners know this story, but a kid in, I don't know if I'm saying this right, Caraccio, one of the Caribbean island, goes into his father's closet, and he pulls out this old guitar. You know where this is going.
Yep.
He says to his dad, this old guitar doesn't play very well. Can I take it to get it fixed? So he takes the guitar to this guy, Donald, who happens to be an immigration officer at the airport. Because whoever sold this guy, his father, the guitar, remember, was working at the airport.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe that guy got fired and they knew he stole stuff too. So this guy also fixes guitars, I guess.
Yeah.
So he asked the kid to come back the next day, and in the meantime, he takes pictures and he confirms it's Peter Frampton's Black Beauty.
Yeah.
Peter's management gets involved, but the next day the kid comes back, and Donald makes the mistake, I know, of telling him whose guitar it is.
Yeah.
And the kid gets scared and grabs the guitar, and he's gone.
Yeah. It was interesting. Yeah. Well, so I found it fascinating that this guy just recognizes the guitar right away.
Yeah.
Because he actually reaches out to Peter. But then it's also interesting that Peter he knows it's the guitar, but he doesn't admit it right away.
Mm-hmm.
Because he's worried, like, how does this guy have this guitar?
Yeah.
So he slow plays it, like, it might be, but I have to listen to it to know for sure.
Yeah. Because they have a certain tone.
Yeah. Well, in that time span, it's gone.
Yeah.
The kid is out of the shop.
Yeah.
And by the time Peter gets down there, Donald who fixed it is like, I don't know his address or anything. I just know he brought it in.
I don't know how this guy could play the guitar for 15 years. It sounded like he was doing shows.
Uh-huh.
But, maybe it was one of those things where they didn't want to go raid his house. And there were rumors, maybe, that this guy had this guitar and then he put it away. Who knows how long it was put away for.
Right.
And then there was probably rumors like Peter Frampton's guitar was stolen from this airport. And then the kid brings it and, like, he probably kind of knew maybe what it might look like. I don't know.
Right.
So chapter 15, Black Beauty returns. So before we get into Black Beauty again, Peter's son Julian calls him and he needs help. And sadly, he's deep into drugs and alcohol. So he's sent to Sierra Tucson in Arizona, which is still operating. I looked it up. It's still operating, which is good. Peter reunites with his first wife, and he kind of resets himself and apologizes for what he put everyone through and the arguments and things he said and he's done to his family. But what has he done? We need to know this stuff. This is what the book is for. You need to tell us.
Yeah.
Did you beat your wife, Peter?
Very lacking.
Let's tell us that. But so this is kind of a rebirth moment. But now that he's on good terms with Barbara and Tina and Peter, now that he's good terms with Barbara, him and Tina are not in a good place.
Right.
I don't know if it's because of this, like him talking to his ex-wife again.
Yeah.
He kind of hints it's because Barbara's back in the picture, and they get divorced. And Peter moves back to Nashville. I think we missed a move here somewhere. But and he ends up buying a recording studio.
Well, he always buys high and sells low.
Yeah,
that was his motto.
Yeah. So now he not only buys a house, he buys a recording studio.
Did we miss when Taft maybe bought his last house that had the recording studio in it?
No, I mentioned that.
Oh, okay.
I think that was that Cincinnati or somewhere? I don't know.
That's okay.
Yeah. So in 2011, he did shows where he played the entire Frampton Comes Alive album. I would have loved to see that. And these shows were between 3 and 3.5 hours without a break.
Yeah.
It's like Springsteen stuff. And we finally get to the conclusion of Black Beauty. 2 years after the kid ran off with Peter's guitar, he comes back and says to Donald, "So how much are you going to pay me for this guitar?" "I want to buy another one." Donald asks the kid how much he wants for it, and the kid says $5,000. And we don't get a we don't know if he was like, there's, this is like when you're watching the news and they give you half the story. And
right.
You're like, okay, where's the other?
Yeah.
Where's the conclusion here? So they do arrange for Donald to get the guitar back to Peter, but Donald's nervous that he's going to get arrested for stolen property. And he ends up flying to Nashville with the Minister of Tourism because they think it'd be good for tourism. That I don't think it is.
Right.
This guitar was stolen like 20 years ago, and
right.
it's not like they got it back like a month later.
Yeah.
And they didn't even do anything to get this guitar back. So Peter finally gets his guitar back, and then now we're on to the last chapter, 16, the final tour, final countdown. So the chapter begins with the year 2013, and Peter's having trouble with balance and falls on stage after going to catch a beach ball.
Mm-hmm.
He falls again and ends up going to his neurologist, who diagnoses Peter with IBM. Not IBS, IBM. And no, it's not where someone is addicted to the computer.
No.
It stands for Inclusion Body, my bad with word. Myositis,
yeah.
Something like that. Now it affects the muscles, and the muscles actually turn into fat or fatty tissue.
Right.
And there's no real cures except exercising. And then the chapter goes into the blues album, which I really love, called All Blues. My favorite is the last song in the album, Same Old Blues. That's a great song. And Peter announces the final tour as his IBM is getting worse. And as we know, Peter is currently on tour. We should have gone to see him. He played like a week, 2 ago in Bethlehem.
Yeah.
So this book was written while COVID was going on. And he was working on another. There should also be a follow-up to this book, but I know we bought it. I bought it when it came out. So... but he was at the time he was working on another instrumental album called Peter Frampton Forgets the Words, which I have the signed copy of that, and I love that album. And that came out 4 years ago. What's today? I don't know what today's date is.
27th, I think.
Okay, on the 23rd, it was 4 years.
Okay.
And then, so I don't know, my overall thought is that, it could have been a little better or much better. And I think there's a lot of filler in the book.
Yep.
Like we said before, we don't need to know every time he moved. And he had to mention every album he's ever recorded. There's cool things he mentioned. I would have liked the writing process of some of the songs, like he didn't even go into how he wrote the songs, came up with the songs, except a couple songs he did, like the
Show Me the Way
and the Humble Pie song. I don't know. It seemed like he was kind of guarded, or like I said, he didn't remember stuff. I mean, it could have been the drugs and the alcohol. You forget.
Right.
Forget things, or did that really happen? And maybe you didn't want to put it in there.
Of the three we've talked about, it was definitely my least favorite of the three. It, I said earlier it was disappointing to some extent. The book itself wasn't bad, but being a big fan of Peter Frampton, I was hoping like the Brian Johnson book, we were going to get more background on, not just him alone, but Humble Pie and the thought process of some of the songs that he wrote, or what was his state of mind when he wrote those songs, what encouraged him to write some of the songs that became hits, stuff like that. And filler is kind of the perfect word. There was a lot of name dropping in this book, but he didn't really expand on it all that often.
No.
You mentioned David Bowie, John Lennon, George Harrison, Pete Townsend. There was some big names. And you get like 2 or 3 pages, and that's it. Like, there's nothing more about it. It was really, I don't know, it was kind of, it left me wanting a lot more. 341 pages wasn't enough. I would have read 700 if we would have gotten a lot more background on some of the,
I think we're going downhill with the book.
Some of his experiences.
We started with Brian Johnson. Dave Grohl was... Actually, now I'm thinking the Dave Grohl book was a lot better than the Peter Frampton.
I was going to say, that was probably my second. The Brian Johnson one was the best one so far that we've done. And I've read some great autobiographies of musicians. Like Nikki Sixx has a good one that's out. But I don't know, just this one left me disappointed.
Yeah.
And I think it's because I was such a big fan that I really was hoping to connect to it more and learn more. I mean, Peter Frampton's the first musician I ever saw live.
Okay.
So, there's always that nostalgia for me. He was someone that I didn't know going into the concert. He opened for Journey.
Okay.
So I went into it and I'm like, I don't know who Peter Frampton is. I knew a couple songs, but I left it becoming a huge fan.
Do you remember what year?
It was at the fairgrounds, and it would have been probably the mid to late 90s.
Okay.
Or maybe even the early 2000s, because I got the Now album after seeing him. I was like, oh, Peter Frampton's got a new album coming out. I want it. Now, I don't know that it was that same year. It might have been a couple years after, but...
Yeah. That's great, though, because he feels that probably he might feel he never picked up any new fans. I don't know.
Right.
And at one point, I remember in the book, he thought he lost all the guys to the women.
Because he was so concerned about being a boy band.
Yeah. Now, my friend Sam Vale, he is the brother of Ken Vale Jr., who sadly, passed away last year and was like a music historian. So now I'm friends with... Ironically, I was never friends with Sam until Ken passed away.
Oh, geez.
Sam is a musician. He plays guitar, and he's in a band. And he told me, he started reading the Peter Wolf book, and he already says it's absolutely mesmerizing. That's what he said, absolutely mesmerizing. Eventually we'll get to the Peter Wolf book, the review that. And I mentioned the Peter Frampton book to him, and he told me his band opened for Peter one time.
That's cool.
Now, they won a Battle of the Bands contest. And they got to open for him at Pine Knob in Clarkston, Michigan, and to about 12,000 people. Can you imagine? He got to hang with Peter. He said he was a perfect English gentleman, which I gather from this book.
I could say that came up a lot too, yeah.
And I get the idea now why we don't have crazy stories in the book.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry, I'm going to give this book like a 4 or 5 out of a 10 because it was half the book I wanted it to be, I guess. But
it was lacking in a lot of areas. And you said earlier, it was kind of like a grocery list. Like, all right, just check. Got this. But it didn't expand on anything. It was just, we did this in 69. We did this in 72.
Yeah.
We did this in 73. Without the years, you had to piece that part together yourself.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of, the stories didn't always align when he was flashing back, which is why I struggled with the timeline.
Yeah.
The Black Beauty is a great example. It got mentioned like 6 or 7 times, but in various spots of the book.
Yeah.
I don't know. Just...
Yeah, that was kind of weird. I mean, he could have had that as a separate chapter.
Yeah.
The whole story on...
Just that alone.
What he could have done, he could have started with what he started with and then ended with the whole story about the guitar.
Right. Right.
But I'm looking at the book now. There's a lot of great photos, though. I wouldn't discourage people to... I mean, we basically told you about the whole book, but if you're a big Frampton fan, I'd say get it. There are things we didn't mention in the book, but nothing really mind-blowing.
No.
I think there's construction going outside the window here. So I don't know what's going on. So, yeah. So that's our review. Do you feel like I do? And thank you, Jeremy. Jeremy, like I said, I haven't seen Jeremy since January. And hopefully Jeremy will be doing more podcasts again with me. We're going to try and do like some remote. We're going to try. And, I might have the other Jeremy in here. I don't know. Jeremy 2.
Well, we've got an exciting concert coming up.
Yeah.
I know. I am thrilled.
Yeah, maybe we'll do a short podcast just about AC/DC.
There you go.
And the concert and the trip and everything.
If you follow me on Facebook, I might be driving you nuts. I'm doing my 30 favorite, like, personal AC/DC songs, so we're halfway through that already.
Yeah. And, we're going to Landover, Maryland. They are playing. I think they're playing... I don't think they're playing Philly. I think they're playing...
Pittsburgh.
And Madison Square Garden, maybe, or something. So,
I think it was Boston.
Oh, okay.
I think our closest options were Pittsburgh, Boston, or Maryland.
Yeah.
And we went with Maryland.
Yeah, so we're going to Maryland, just staying over, overnight. And, no, really looking forward. Neither one of us have seen AC/DC, and I'm pretty sure it's going to be the last.
Well, and the opener, neither of us have seen either, right?
Yeah, Pretty Reckless.
Yeah.
Yeah. So thanks, everybody, for tuning in. And remember to turn off that TV.
And turn up the music.
You've been listening to No Good Music. Today's show was produced by Rob J. Lilly and recorded live and unedited at the Did You Say 7 Studios in Washington, New Jersey. You can find No Good Music on Podbean, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, and almost anywhere you listen to podcasts. Intro and exit music by the band 99%.